Domestic violence against women is a cultural norm. Yes, surprisingly, up till today, this is still occurring. It might be your next door neighbor or your friend. We would never know, but we can always spot some signs here and there. Due to the strong societal view of women as weak and vulnerable, men tend to use their patriarchal power structure and physical strength and size to be one with authority and use it against women. And this occurs behind closed doors, especially in marriage. The World Health Organization described domestic violence as the behavior that causes physical, sexual, and psychological harm, acted by an intimate partner, resulting into injury and even death. Domestic violence could also be described as the power misused by one in a relationship to control the other. Of course, domestic violence does occur to men too. However, the cases for men to be victims varies very much differently when compared to women being victims. Women are victims of domestic violence at a rate of 5 times compared to men. This is solely because of the gender inequality that is still occurring in our generation today. Fortunately, domestic violence is now well recognized worldwide as a public health concern as well as human rights violation. However, the cases of domestic violence still exist in silence. Domestic violence takes different forms, from physical, sexual, to even psychological, emotional, and financial. Due to the authority men feel with women, they have the tendency to rise above and be controlling for every single thing in their partner's life. 85% of the violent crimes reported by women in the United States is domestic violence. Of course, the most common and easy to notice form of violence is physical. Slapping, hitting, kicking, pushing is some of the mild violence that men usually practice onto women. Unfortunately, it could go as far as threatening a woman with sticks or even weapons. Physical violence is often disguised as accidents to hide the obvious bruising or scars. Besides the short-term effects, the long-term effects of this could lead to internal bleeding or damaged organs. Sometimes domestic violence occurs only time to time, but when it occurs chronically and repeatedly, it is known to be wife battering. Men who batters their wife feel like they have the authority in the family to punish when the wife or partner don't do things exactly their way. It couldn't get any worse than that, right? Well, India has one of the most highest cases of acid throwing, where husbands throw acid which disfigures the woman, and it could go to the extent of burning them and eventually murder. Other than physical violence, it is important to know that verbal and psychological violence occurs as well. Verbal violence usually includes talking to the partners down and body shaming them. Psychological violence are similar in ways where it could lead to victims to substance abuse, unhealthy weight control behaviors. It could further lead to long-term post-traumatic disorder, depression, and even anxiety. Domestic violence is also one of the major reasons for suicide. Lastly, sexual violation or abuse of the woman's reproductive system includes forced sexual initiation, which could lead to bleeding or chronic pain. In most cases, this leads to unwanted or unplanned pregnancies, which further leads to female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation is defined by the World Health Organization as the partial or definite removal of external genitalia or other trauma to the female genital organs. According to the World Health Organization, 100 to 140 million girls and women have experienced some form of female genital mutilation. Other than that, women are at risk of getting sexual transmitted diseases if their husbands or partners engages in extramarital sex, which further leads to the risk of getting HIV. Financial abuse also occur under domestic violence, which includes the controlling of the woman's job and income. This leads to women being financially dependent on their abusive partners and not being able to get out of the relationship. This is so much worse when a child is in the picture. The mother or wife is not able to go through a divorce and the child is forced to grow up in an unhealthy environment, which could lead to trauma or adopting the behavior he witnessed, which would repeat the cycle of domestic violence all over again. Many would say, why can't the victims just leave the relationship? It is harder than it seems. The victims that went through the violence eventually would be too psychologically abused, and she would be manipulated to the violence being a form of love or that she deserved it. Other than that, most have the fear of reporting domestic violence as there is a possible chance of the partner harming them further in reprisal. Financial constrictions could also be a factor. As I previously mentioned, the victim would be financially dependent and have no choice to stay or live in poverty instead. Lastly, when it comes to having children, victims usually have no choice but to stay because they usually fear that their children would grow up without all the needs provided. However, staying would still also affect the child in ways where trauma grows through the witnessing of violence. The health sector plays a vital role in creating a safe space for victims of domestic violence, where they are respected and not stigmatized by giving them a chance to be heard. Besides that, they are able to identify the abuse earlier and be able to prevent it from prolonging. Lastly, they could also work in networking with social services to help the victims out. I hope that I gave you enough depth onto the seriousness of domestic violence against women. Let's work hand in hand to give more awareness to it and stop the cultural norms of gender inequality. Thank you so much.